You know that feeling you get when you wake up looking for a reason to make someone's life miserable? Like, before you've even had your coffee, you're already frowning at the world? Well then, I met this kind of creature in person. She had a name, of course, but here we'll just call her the woman. Because after what she did, I refused to repeat her name as if she were a person. The whole thing started out of the blue. On any given Sunday, one of those days when you wake up late, put your chair on the balcony and just sit there listening to the birds and the branches of the century-old tree dancing in the wind. This tree, by the way, wasn't just a tree. It was almost a member of the family. It was there even before the city was founded. Who knows? There were popular legends about it, saying that its shade cured headaches, that lovers met under it, that a specific bird only laid its eggs there. In short, the tree was practically the neighborhood's spiritual heritage. But for her, it was just a giant vegetable nuisance casting shade on her gourmet balcony. Ah, that gourmet balcony. How ironic, because the woman didn't even have the sense to be a gourmet. She'd moved in, 2 weeks ago, and she already thought she ran the whole street. She arrived distributing glances as if she were a UN auditor inspecting a war zone. She assessed the fences, the dogs, the clothes on the line, and, of course, the tree. One day, I went out to sweep the sidewalk and found 2 City Hall employees measuring the radius of the tree's crown with a 5-meter tape measure. I thought it was standard maintenance. But no, the younger one, looking like he was still learning how to clock in, let me go. It's just that there's been a complaint that this tree is encroaching on other people's property with its shadows. People, shadows, illegal shadows. I didn't reply for a few seconds because my soul left my body and went for a walk around the block in disbelief. The woman had apparently filed a formal complaint, saying that the shade from the century-old tree was taking over her yard, which, according to her, prevented the plants from growing and hindered the solar experience of the house. That's right, solar experience. I had to ask again, just to make sure she wasn't talking about a solar panel. But no, it was the natural light. According to her, her house was entitled to direct sunlight, with no botanical interruptions. And there I was, broom in hand, wondering if she was also going to report the clouds for a lighting offense. Except, of course, the officials were there out of duty. They knew the complaint was ridiculous, but order is order. The woman, on the other hand, came out of her house like someone coming down from a stage, with a piece of paper in her hand and dark glasses worthy of a soap opera villain. She started pointing at the tree, speaking as if she were giving a speech at a public hearing. This tree clearly exceeds the acceptable limits of an urban canopy. It's affecting my yard, my mental health, and my quality of life. I demand action. The neighborhood was already up in arms. Donatida, from the house in front, even grabbed a chair to watch. Her son started filming in hiding, and I, the town's mayor, stood there with a broom in my hand and an absurd desire to laugh. Because, you see, she didn't know. The woman was demanding that the town hall prune a heritage tree, without knowing that the person signing the orders there was me, the mayor, the boss, the big boss, and for the time being, I was just watching the circus burn. She, thinking she was the star of the show, kept shouting out statutes and imaginary articles from a manual that only existed in her head. She had an aura of arrogance mixed with the kind of certainty that only those who have read 2 paragraphs on Google have. She threw around words like residential rights, solar privacy, and misuse of public aerial areas. I even thought about asking her if she wanted to measure the moon's shadow too. But the best thing was that she talked, and ended with, "If the town hall doesn't take action, I'll hire someone to cut down that tree myself." And that's when my blood began to boil. Because threatening to cut down a tree that has survived 3 floods, 2 corrupt mayors, and even a lightning strike is serious business. And I, as well as being mayor, am a resident of this street. I grew up playing under that tree. I saw my daughter take her first steps there. I hid from it when my wife was nervous, and I needed 5 minutes of peace. That tree was my ally, my accomplice. At that moment, I still didn't say anything. I let it drown in its own poison, because I knew what was coming next. The paperwork was going to go up, and I was going to make a point of filing the response in person. After all, few things are as delicious as knocking down an idiotic attack with class and an official stamp. And that was just the first part, you see, because when she found out who I was, then it got really bad. That night, after the woman's little show in front of my house, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine and stared at my tree. That wooden lady who had seen entire generations pass by, now threatened by a newcomer who thought she could solve everything with a shout and a spreadsheet. You know, the kind of people who treat life like a condominium meeting? Well, she was the embodiment of that. And the worst thing was that I was beginning to realize that her problem wasn't even just the shadow. It was control. The woman wanted to control everything, even the sun. The next day, an official notice arrived at the town hall. It was signed by her in a pretentious tone that only called for champagne and a red carpet. It said that if we didn't take action about the aerial invasion of the tree, she would take legal action against the municipality for reverse environmental negligence. I had to reread that sentence 3 times. Reverse? What do you mean? The tree is going to fight back. I showed the paper to my secretary, and she gave me that, "Is this really serious?" look. Yes, it was. The woman really thought that a tree was part of a personal conspiracy against the peace of her yard. And the most ironic thing, her house was new, modern, full of technology. But even with all that decorating magazine architecture, she couldn't cope with a tree. I think she expected the whole neighborhood to be an IKEA catalog, without any unpredictable elements, like nature. I kept to myself. I made a point of not showing any reaction, because that kind of person feeds off the attention they get. But inside, I was already setting the stage for revenge. And it wasn't for revenge, it was for honor, for the historical justice of that tree. And also, let's be honest, for pure personal satisfaction. Who hasn't dreamt of overturning someone's arrogant argument with the force of law? The paperwork was filed. I formally refused the request. I cited the right articles, the environmental protection laws, the trees listing documents, its history. Everything was millimetrically correct. Stamp, signature, timbre, and I had it delivered personally to the woman's address, along with a framed copy of the oldest photo we have of the tree, black and white, 1940s, with my grandfather sitting in its shade playing dominoes. A treat, but the woman didn't back down. The next day, she showed up with a private arborist, a guy who looked like he'd never seen an axe before, wearing a t-shirt with green solutions written on it and holding a clipboard. He spent a whole hour walking around the tree, measuring everything with a look like he was trying to figure out which part was more illegal, the branches, the roots, or the trunk. In the end, he nodded positively at her. I laughed. Of course he did. She's the one who's paying. What were you going to say? Donatsita, the street's official gossip, told me that the woman had already been telling the neighborhood that she was going to solve the problem of the tree that darkened the soul of the street. Yes, soul. She was treating the shadow as if it were a spiritual plague. And the most comical thing was that nobody but her was bothered. Most residents found the shade a relief, especially in summer. But the woman had decided that the street needed light. Light, sun, clarity, anything but common sense. She began to mobilize her neighbors. She created a WhatsApp group called Enlightened Neighborhood. She called people who don't even live on the street. She sent 4-minute audio messages explaining how the tree's shade affected her productivity in the home office, how it hindered her plants from photosynthesizing, how dangerous it was for children to play under such dense branches. I almost replied with a photo of my daughter sleeping in a hammock, right under the shadow that posed risks, but I thought it best to save it for the hearing. Yes, because she filed a lawsuit against me, personally, and against the city council for colluding with a natural threat that is disproportionate to the urban environment. I had to stop myself from laughing in front of the lawyer. And the best part? In the lawsuit, she attached a graph of hours of sunshine lost because of the tree, made by herself in Excel, with false percentages, colorful tables, and a conclusion worthy of a doctoral thesis in applied zucchini. Meanwhile, the whole town was commenting on the story. There was an article in the local paper, the radio made fun of it. Even a meme page on Instagram made a post. Woman wants to prune century-old tree for casting shade. Next step, sue the sunset. But the most glorious moment was yet to come. Because the woman, in her thirst for victory, decided to appeal. She called for an interview with an environmental blogger and tried to pass herself off as a victim. She said she was fighting alone against an archaic system that is resistant to modern changes, that she was being silenced by authorities who fear progress. And in the middle of her speech, she let out a pearl. This city needs someone with vision, because those in power today clearly don't care about the quality of life of the next generation. That was it. That moment. The blogger, looking like he already knew everything, asked sarcastically, "And you know who the current mayor of the city is, right?" The woman froze. For the first time, no answer. The blogger then showed her a photo of me on my cell phone, next to the tree, with the caption, "Mayor plants saplings in honor of the centenary tree." She tried to cover it up, but her face froze. It was as if the world had slapped her in the face with 5 fingers. And only one thought echoed in my head at that moment. Now, the joke was on. After the interview, the city became a spectacle. Even the newsagent on the corner started giving his opinion on the case of the tree. And everyone already knew who she was. The woman who tried to erase the history of an entire neighborhood because she wanted more sun to water her imported succulents. The woman who thought that with half a dozen shouts and an Excel file, she could double the weight of 100 years of roots. And best of all, now she knew who I was. And, my friend, it was so beautiful to see her reaction. You could taste the shame running down her face. It wasn't even 2 days after the interview that she sent me an email with the title, "Request for a respectful and civilized conversation." I replied with 2 words, "Provoke first," because if there's one thing that annoys people like that, it's bureaucracy. They love demanding rules from others, but hate it when the rule also applies to them. I asked the secretary to respond formally, instructing the lady to contact the legal department if she wanted to talk. And that was that. Silence. For 2 days. On the 3rd day, she chirped on the sidewalk. She stopped in front of a tree with a tape measure, a briefcase, and a tripod with a camera. She started talking to herself, measuring the trunk, pointing to the sky, taking photos and recording videos as if she were making an award-winning documentary. At one point, she literally shouted, "This tree is the symbol of urban backwardness." Yes, she shouted that. In the middle of the street, with a camera facing her. And no, nobody asked for this performance. Donatita called me just to say, "She's freaking out on the sidewalk. Do you want me to record it?" I just said, "Record it in HD." Because now I was having fun. What was supposed to be an attack became entertainment. I'd arrive at the town hall, and the officials would ask me if the tree had already hired a lawyer. The city gardener asked me to name the tree Maria Quiteria, after an Independence heroine. Meanwhile, the woman was desperately trying to find support. She tried to reverse the case as if it were a public health issue. She presented medical reports saying that the shadow aggravated her rhinitis. She handed over a letter from her 7-year-old niece saying that the tree was scary, and she even tried, astonishingly, to mobilize the Residents' Association with a petition that only had 3 signatures. Her husband, who seemed to be trapped in that marriage like someone serving time, and a certain Marvin, who we discovered was her cat. Literally. His name was written in children's handwriting, and his paw was stamped. The highlight of her antics was when she hired a private company to start pruning, even though she didn't have permission. A truck showed up early in the morning with 2 uniformed guys and a chainsaw switched off. Lucky for me, I had installed cameras there a long time ago, and luckier still that the truck driver, before starting anything, decided to knock on my door to check if that was what it was. When I answered, his eyes went wide. Right? Ah, so the lady next door hired us to prune her tree. She said she had permission from the town hall. She lied, and now you can turn off the engine, move the truck out of front of my house, and if you want, you can stay for a coffee, but no chainsaw. The guy almost apologized on his knees. He said he didn't want any trouble, that he was just there to work. I understood. They were victims of lies, like everyone else. I asked them to give me a copy of the service request, and, of course, I made sure to record everything. Photo, video, license plate, because now it was no longer a question of neighborly bullshit. She had tried to carry out a criminal act against a city heritage site, and that, legally speaking, is almost spitting on the flag. The next day, I officially reported the attempted damage to the historical heritage, and I filed a criminal complaint against her. Simple, cold, objective. The woman who wanted sunshine at any cost was now going to feel the weight of the process that can't be solved with a spreadsheet. And to complete the package, I called in the public prosecutor's office, because when you're dealing with the public good, the hole is deeper. In other words, the circus was on, but this time with a judge, a prosecutor, and a hearing scheduled. The local press, of course, was notified. They love a shindig with substance. Headline on the city's website: Mayor denounces resident for attempting to mutilate century-old tree. The photo in the article was a close-up of the tree with a banner put up by residents. Respect those who came before you. The best part was seeing the spontaneous movement in the neighborhood. Children made posters with drawings of the tree, old people sat in a circle under it with beach chairs, and even a group of young activists came out of nowhere to hold a symbolic vigil with lanterns and medieval songs. I swear, there was even a flute. Her? Gone. She disappeared for a few days. Not even her shadow appeared on the street. I think she finally understood that she had messed with the wrong thing. But calm down. She still had a card up her sleeve, because people like that never accept losing. They just keep quiet while they plan the next disaster. And when she came back, well, what she did afterwards surpassed anything I thought possible. But that, you'll see in the next part. Because yes, there's more, and it gets worse. She disappeared for exactly 9 days. 9 days. It seemed like a deal, almost a quarantine of common sense. During that time, the street breathed again. The atmosphere literally changed. The shade of the tree became even more beautiful. It seemed calmer, as if even it had felt the relief of the absence of that lost soul. The neighborhood stopped whispering. The children started playing on the sidewalk again, and the world seemed to be back on track. But on the 10th day, like any good-bad horror movie, she reappeared. In a patterned dress, high heels, and an expression on her face that mixed defeat with some twisted hope of revenge. And that's exactly what she tried. Revenge. Not against me directly, because now she knew the fight was too big for her ego, but she found a loophole. Or at least, she thought she had. The woman simply showed up at the town hall at the time of the public session, asking to speak. She used her 10 minutes as a tax-paying citizen to deliver the greatest monologue ever recorded since the Titanic speech. She said that she was being persecuted, that she was being silenced, that the city council was stifling the rights of the new emerging middle class. Yes, that was the term. New emerging middle class. As if she were the official ambassador of urban clarity. She complained that the neighborhood was stagnant, that old trees were preventing it from evolving, and that those who opposed change were, in her words, intoxicated by an unproductive nostalgia. I swear. She said this with a broken voice, holding back a fake tear as if she were receiving an award for alternative cinema. She said she wanted to found a movement, Residents for Light, and that she hoped future generations would live in a brighter neighborhood, both physically and spiritually. The audience? In shock. Some people laughed. Others coughed just to disguise the urge to laugh. And me? I stood there in my chair, just watching, with a restrained smile and a pen in my hand, ready to write down anything that came out of her mouth and could be used later. It wasn't difficult. She left a feast. When she had finished speaking, one of the counselors, who was already here with the case, stood up and asked in a very firm tone, "Are you implying that you want to change the city's environmental legislation to allow cutting down protected trees?" She stammered. She said that wasn't quite true. She wanted technical revisions, that everything depended on the context. And then it was downhill. The counselor, who, by the way, was a former biology teacher, started quoting laws, figures, studies. He put her against the wall with elegance and destruction, and the woman left almost tripping over her heels, as if she'd been slapped by reality. But the real plot twist came later. The complaint I filed about the attempted illegal pruning? It had statewide repercussions. The prosecutor's office got involved. The press started digging into the woman's life, and it didn't take long for them to discover that her house had been illegally built at the back. A little gourmet building that encroached on the sidewalk, without a permit, without anything. That same area where she said the shade caused impacts. And that's when I understood everything. The bullshit with the tree was just a smokescreen. She wanted to justify an illegal construction project using the poetic excuse of shade and quality of life. She tried to turn a whim into a public cause. But she forgot that when you poke the wrong hornet's nest, the hornets come with documents, badges, and stamps. The building inspector was there, gave notice, embargoed, and even fined. Heavy. And guess what? The woman tried to appeal, saying that the work was a therapeutic space under construction. She wanted to claim that the space was for meditation, and that this somehow gave her exemption from regularization. I almost asked them to put this on a billboard in the city. Build without a permit, meditate, and be forgiven. The icing on the cake came weeks later, when the court hearing was scheduled. And, as was my right, I went. Not as mayor, but as a resident. The woman arrived in a white suit, like a soap opera lawyer who's going to lose the case. She sat down, crossed her legs, and applied lipstick in the middle of the waiting room. I sat on the other side with a coffee and a smile, just waiting for the judge to call. And it was a lesson. The prosecutor destroyed her every argument on legal grounds. She showed photos, videos, the history of the tree, previous attempts to prune it, the hiring of the clandestine company, the permit lie, and even brought the dossier of the irregular work. It was like a live investigative report. The woman tried to interrupt about 3 times, but was cut off with that, "Ma'am, the microphone is mine now," tone. When it was my turn to speak, I was brief. I said that the tree was older than most of the residents in the neighborhood. That cutting it down because of a shadow was the equivalent of demolishing a museum because someone thinks the building is ugly, and that the woman wasn't fighting for any rights, but only for vanity. The judge was short and blunt. She dismissed all the allegations. She kept the tree protected. She also referred the case of the construction site for further investigation. The woman left the room without saying a word. Her heel echoed in the corridor like a poorly rehearsed apology. After that, she disappeared for good. She sold the house. She left the neighborhood without making a fuss. The "for sale" sign appeared one morning, and a week later, another removal car was parked in front. The tree remained, untouched, beautiful, firm like always. The neighborhood went back to the way it was, and her story became legend. To this day, the children ask if the woman of the sun is coming back. I always say no, because those who fight with the shadow never understand the light. And you know what? I still drink my coffee under the tree, with gusto, because some victories aren't celebrated with fireworks, but with silence, shade, and peace. Don't forget to leave your like and opinion in the comments.